Hi, I'm Christopher Warnock of Renaissance Astrology, and today I'd like to talk about Eric Purdue's new translation of three books of occult philosophy, but I'd also like to talk about Agrippa and three books of occult philosophy in general, and then also make some points about how to work with and use translations. So let's start off talking about Henry Cornelius Agrippa, who's the original author of three books of occult philosophy. He was born in 1486. He began writing his magnum opus, Three Books of Occult Philosophy, in 1509. It was finally published in 1531. This is really incredible. This is a 23-year-old he's really a polymath. He looks at hundreds of different sources in the Western esoteric tradition. He synthesizes them. He organizes them in this encyclopedic manner. He comments on them. He really pulls together this very coherent path of not only study but also practice. And really when we look at three books of occult philosophy, this is the 16th century. This is really the height that was reached by the Western esoteric tradition. After 2,000 years or so, before we plunged into the basically ill-named Enlightenment, which signals the beginning of this atheistic materialistic nihilism that we're now sort of mired in. So, really this is the height of sophistication of the Western esoteric tradition. Agrippa is able to look back. He cites all sorts of different sources, the Greeks, the Egyptians, the Chaldeans, all sorts of different sorts of sources and philosophers and sages and works that he's drawn upon, and puts them all together and comes up with a really coherent organization of it. So if we think about this, the title of Three Books of Occult Philosophy is very useful. It's three books. It reflects this threefold division of three worlds: the material world, the celestial world, and the divine world. And so when Agrippa talks about it, he explains the magic that's appropriate for each type. So the material world, we're looking at basically natural magic, the four humors, also occult virtues that are found in material things. In book 2, the celestial world, we're talking really about astrological magic, but also that intermediate realm. In the Sufis' works, they refer to as the Alam al-Mithal, the imaginal world, and this is essentially like dreams that have form but no substantial matter like the material world. And then finally the divine world. These are the world of the archetypes, the Platonic ideas, and the type of magic that's appropriate for that. What's interesting about this is that these worlds are not in some other physical location. It's not as if they're somewhere else and we can get to them physically. I mean, they're right in front of us. They're intermingled and interpenetrate, and at this very moment, we can see these different worlds right in front of us if we have a deep enough philosophical insight. So in addition to this very rigorous philosophical foundation, Three Books of Occult Philosophy also has an incredible amount of practical information for all sorts of esoteric arts, in particular astrology and astrological magic, which is what I'm interested in. So, for example, when we talk about astrological talismans, we have very specific recipes. Don't give you everything you need, but they certainly give you a lot of the information that if you have the basics as a traditional astrologer, for example, you can understand how to use them for planetary talismans, fixed star talismans, the 28 mansions of the moon, the 36 decan faces, house talismans. I mean, an incredible wealth of practical information. Another area that's very useful, that's one of the things that Agrippa is very popular for, are magic squares. These are grids of numbers that if you add them up horizontally, vertically, diagonally, they all add up to the same number. These are then key to the planets, and then using the gematria, and the number letter correspondences, you can take these numbers and then generate letters and names. They're used to generate sigils. Like, for example, if you have the magic square of Venus, you can generate the sigil of the intelligence of Venus by inputting the name in there. So that's extremely useful. Very popular. People really like to plug in the numbers as sort of an AI kind of thing. In addition to all this practical information, it's really very well organized. I mean, you've got, like I said, practical information, philosophical information, and then it's laid out very clearly. It's certainly a lot more well organized than, say, Picatrix, which is one of the key sources for astrological magic that Agrippa used. Picatrix is about 500 years earlier, and you can see how much more sort of organized and coherent Agrippa's thought are. Now, the thing about three books of occult philosophy is that a certain number of modern esotericists can get kind of snooty about Agrippa. There's a couple of reasons for this. First of all, three books of occult philosophy was never lost. It's been continuously available since it was published in the 16th century. The J.F. English translation came out. It was an early modern translation. You could find the copy of that, throughout the sort of drought of the 18th and 19th century. You need to make some effort, but you could get a copy of it if you put the time into it. Modern esotericists tend to like rare stuff. They can buy it, they can stick it on the shelf, it's leather bound, it's fancy, goat skin or whatever. There are only a few copies available. And they really, with three books of occult philosophy, that JF translation is really widely available now. I mean, it's in PDF all over the place, it's on the internet. That just doesn't have any street cred if you want to show what an elitist you are and how special you are. There's a real appeal to having a new book, that no one's ever seen before. You come up with new things, or it's been hidden for so long, no one's been available to us. And the fact that three books of occult philosophy is so well known, it really counts against it again for the points of that. Now, part of this feeds into the, ego, and I'm trying to be special, I'm trying to be elitist. But there's also this view that what we're looking for is sort of secret information. And what people have done is they picked up three books of occult philosophy. They got the PDF or they got the Llewellyn version of it or whatever, and they flipped through it really quickly, and they're looking for that secret information. And you'll read that, and everything will be revealed. It's sort of like a hack, or a tip. And that's what this is all about, really. Was we're trying to get these hacks and tips, and we're chasing the sort of mirage that there's going to be a book that we'll read and everything will be revealed to us. That we have 99% of what we need to know. We just have little bits of information we'll put in there, secret words, incantation or something like that, and be able to do everything. Okay, well, that's obviously a myth. Also, Agrippa is, even though it's easily accessible, it's not that easy to understand. It's coming from a worldview that's not atheistic materialist. It's not. It's deliberately put together. Agrippa even says, "Look, I've split things up. I've made some parts of this hard to understand. You're really going to have to put the time in to understand it." So that's another reason why people are, again. Yeah, I looked at three books of occult philosophy. It doesn't make any sense. I read the first part and it's talking about some crazy fish that stops a ship, and I don't believe in that. So I'm going to throw the baby out with the bathwater. The whole thing is useless. And so again. Being able to penetrate through to the real content of Agrippa is difficult. It's much more difficult than people realize. It's not just about adding new bits of information, and there's not tricks or tips. I mean, that's really one of those misnomers about the whole esoteric path, is that somehow you could easily read something and it's going to be easily accessible to you. Really what it calls for is this self-transformation, starting with worldview, and then transformation both of philosophy, conscious philosophy, your unconscious views of reality, and then a lot of practice. And one of the things that Agrippa talks about in the third book, he talks about the dignification, which is really raising the soul up and union with the divine. That's really necessary for the true mage. Now, and that's not something you're just going to read quickly, like I said, in a hack. So when we realize this and we come back to it, we recognize that really almost everything that we need for Western esoteric practice is right there in three books of occult philosophy. Now, you can need some supplemental stuff, technical information, like Agrippa, for example, he's talking about the astrological talisman, says this is found in the books of astrologers. You're going to need to know the basics. But the plan is all there and it's clear. And so you don't need to chase that mirage of secret information. It's all there. What you need to do is sit down with a book and start working with it. So I was really happy. Eric started talking to me about translation, a new translation of Three Books of Occult Philosophy. There's the JF translation, which was done, as I said, in the 17th century. It's in early modern English. It's got some obscure passages. Eric was talking about doing a translation using the new Latin Critical Edition. Critical Edition, they take all the manuscripts, they compare them, they go line by line. It's really the most accurate version of the original, which is written in Latin. So, Eric, I actually published book one, The Material World, as a paperback, many years ago. It still pops up on Amazon, and it's a little confusing. If you go to the current of Eric's translation to the Amazon listing of it, the reviews appear to have been ported over, so it's kind of confusing. So that's something. If you like Eric's translation, I would encourage you to go there and and give it 4 or 5 stars and talk about how much you like it. He really could use the boost of that, having that done. So that again, that's just before I can start out. You can see I have a positive view of Eric's translation. He spent an incredible amount of time on this. He worked really hard on it. He went through an incredible amount of sources, and it was published then. It's just been published by Intertraditions. The edition is really, really gorgeous. I mean, this is a slipcover of it. 3 books of occult philosophy then in hardcover. The hardcovers are really, again, very attractive. You've got these sort of embossed covers. It's really gorgeous. You have to have dies to do that. And each, as you can see, they've gone ahead and done the 3 books. This is the natural world, and then you have the celestial world and the divine world. And as I was saying, have a little bit of a bias here because I wrote the foreword. But before I did that, I actually took a look at, again, I've known Eric for years. I have a lot of respect for him. I took a look at they gave me a copy of the proof copy, which I took a look at, and I said, this is really good. And so I can be very enthused, about writing the foreword. And then again, coming on here, and anyone who asks me, I say, no, I think this is a really good translation. It's definitely worth having. As we look at this translation, really the obvious comparison is to the JF translation, which I think is still definitely usable, definitely serviceable. But as I mentioned before, a lot of people have trouble with the early modern English. I mean, that's 300 years ago. I mean, I'm used to it. It's no problem for me. But it can be problematic for people because it's just it's not a different dialect, but the word choice is different, the syntax and everything like that. Particularly if you're not a native English speaker, it can be difficult to read that. It's hard to make sense out of it. You can get confused. There are some rough spots in it. The classic one is the sign of, they're talking about a dream talisman that you make in the sign of, it says perfection in the JF, and it's actually profection, which you can see if you look at the Latin Critical Edition. Of course, Eric picked that up and got that right. And Eric is knowledgeable about traditional astrology, so he was able to add that technical knowledge into the translation. So it's in modern English. It's based on the Latin Critical Edition, and there's hundreds and hundreds of footnotes. Again, it's really, you can see how much time and effort Eric put into this, and it took him years to come out with it. So that's certainly very useful. I think it's really a useful translation, both for scholarly research, but also a useful reference for practicing astrological magicians or esotericists, and definitely worth having. So something, I can wholeheartedly say, hey, let's go out and get a copy if this is something that really excites you. But I want to talk a little bit about some various issues about translations in general. What I call the myth of the, quote, best translation, and then, how to work with and how to use translations. First, you always have to understand that translation is an art. It's never possible to have an exact correspondence between 2 different languages. There's always a lot of subjective choice on the part of the translator. There's always a range of possible translations that are acceptable, that are useful, and there's never one that's going to be perfect. Anyone that says, and usually this is going to be blasted at maximum volume, that a particular translation is objectively the best translation, doesn't know what they're talking about. I mean, really, this is like saying that chocolate ice cream is best, and it's way better than vanilla. Everybody knows that. Anyone who likes vanilla is an idiot, and I'll shout them down on social media. Really, a lot of what's coming in here is this egoism. There's also a lot of ignorance. I mean, things will get shouted out and they'll just repeat them. There's this sort of echo chamber effect that we get on social media. You've got to recognize that it's really a question of preference. And also best for what? I mean, different translations will be better for different purposes. They'll have different focus, and that these all really come into the mix. So the other thing that, I find a bit distressing as an author and someone who is a translator as well, is that, I've already seen a little bit of sort of niggling and picking away at bits of the Eric's translation, and you've got this book that's hundreds and hundreds of pages, and people are saying, oh, well, I don't like this particular line, and therefore I'm going to throw out the whole thing, you know. And it's like there's never going to be a situation where you're going to 100% agree on the translation. There's always a range there, and there just mistakes can happen. And to say that that's some basis for attacking the person for looking at this tiny piece of it and overlooking the incredible amount of work that's gone into it, it's just, like I said, it's distressing to me as someone who creates it. And I think I look at those critics and I say, what have you done? What have you created? Where's your 300-page translation of this key esoteric text? So just take all that stuff into context and recognize there's a lot of sort of politics and ego and also just misunderstanding about, how the translations work or what the function of a translation is. And really, I'm not going to look at this and say, as much as I like Eric's translation, I'm not going to say it's the best because, like I said, I just reject that. It's really a matter of preference. I mean, I think it's become definitive. It's certainly a translation that I'm going to be working from. But nevertheless, the JF translation is serviceable. It's still usable. That's a very accessible translation, and people can still continue to use it. It's not as if, oh my God, you have to throw that out and never even look at it anymore. And again, if you think about the Llewellyn version of it that Donald Tyson edited, again, he did a lot of work on that. I've used it repeatedly. I found it very helpful. So again, I think that's a useful translation of it as well. Really, ideally, what you'd have is the Latin Critical Edition. You'd have the JF translation. You'd have Eric's translation. And when you got to a knotty passage, you'd look at all three. Because ultimately, there really is no substitute for an in-depth personal understanding. Okay, this idea that somehow you can turn everything over to one translator, you can rely on them 100%, you don't have to think about it at all, they'll do all the thinking for you, and they'll just, blindly follow whatever that person says, that just doesn't make any sense. Any of these translations are basically a jumping off point for your understanding, for your transformation when you're talking about esoteric texts. And really, this is the key to effectively using 3 books of occult philosophy and really following an esoteric with esoteric arts and occult philosophy. You have to do the work. Nobody else can do it for you. And that work really is not consisting of bits of information that you're finding and you're sticking together, but this self-transformation and really engaging, not even with the concepts, but going beneath the concepts to what the writing points to, and allowing that essence to work its transformational effect on you and on the thought and practice. So I hope that's useful. I certainly would urge you to, if you're interested, to get a copy of Eric's translation. If you like it, certainly, again, it would be very helpful to him to go on Amazon. I can't do the review again because I did the foreword, but I certainly urge people that like this translation to go ahead and to give it a good review. Write up in detail what you liked about it. If you don't like it, again, it doesn't make a lot of sense to just go try to torpedo him in social media or Amazon or whatever. It's like, recognize if there's things you don't like about it. It's a bit like I said, like not liking chocolate, and you like vanilla better. Respect the amount of work that has been put into it. Support, Eric and what he's doing. And it doesn't mean you have to swallow it whole, but also, I think it makes sense to really give the respect where respect is due. And it's an incredible amount of work went into this. And, I've certainly, I'm looking forward to delving into this translation and to adding it to my esoteric library.